world, the fight against inflation has been, well, it's been pretty painful. But here's the thing. While most major economies were struggling, India was writing a completely different playbook. So today, we're going to dive into how they pulled it off, how they managed to tame inflation even while their economy was absolutely booming. So let's start with the good news, right? Inflation around the world is finally starting to cool off from those crazy post-pandemic highs. But is that the whole picture? Not even close. Those big headline numbers, they often hide what's really going on underneath.
Okay, so to really get what makes India's stories so special, we've got to zoom out first. Let's take a quick look at the global trend.
All right, so globally, we're looking at inflation around 4.2%. But here's where it gets interesting. Look at the split. You've got the advanced economies, like the US and Europe, down around 2.5%. But then you have the emerging markets, still running pretty hot at 5.3%. And that is the world stage where our story unfolds.
And this is exactly where India's story just completely stands out. Because what they managed to do, especially against that global backdrop we just saw, well, it's pretty remarkable. Get this, 8%. That was India's GDP growth in the first half of fiscal year 2026. I mean, that's not just strong, that's blistering. That's the kind of growth that normally has economists shouting about an overheating economy and runaway inflation. And yet, at the very same time, their average retail inflation was just 1.7%. Let that sink in. High growth, low inflation. That's pretty much the holy grail of economics. So the million-dollar question is, how on earth did they do it? Well, for one thing, it wasn't just a fluke. As S&P Global Ratings points out here, this was years in the making. A big part of it was some serious monetary policy reform. See, India's central bank got really focused on inflation targeting, and that simple, powerful idea helped keep everyone's expectations in check, creating this really stable foundation to build on.
But that stable foundation is only part of the story. The biggest piece of the puzzle, the thing that really hit home for everyday people, was all about food prices. So let's dig into what happened there. I mean, just look at these numbers. We're not talking about prices dipping a little bit. We're talking about a full-on crash. Prices for staples like onions, potatoes, and garlic, they absolutely plummeted. Think about it, a nearly 50% drop in the price of onions alone, that has a huge, huge impact on the country's overall inflation number. And hey, this wasn't just a case of getting lucky with good weather. Nope, the government was actively in the game, managing prices for other key items like pulses. They had a four-step playbook, really. They kept a close eye on market prices. They were quick to adjust trade policies like taxes and imports. They managed their buffer stocks, and then they'd strategically release those stocks into the market when needed. It was all about being proactive, not reactive.
Okay, so falling food prices. That explains a big chunk of this amazing story. But if you look just a little closer at the data, a really strange economic mystery starts to pop up. And to solve this mystery, we need to talk about something called core inflation. You can think of it like this. It's the underlying pulse of the economy. Economists take out the really jumpy, volatile stuff like food and fuel prices to see what the true steady pressure on prices looks like. And right here, this is the puzzle in black and white. On the left, you've got that super low headline inflation, just 1.3%, thanks to those cheap veggies. But on the right, core inflation is way up there, stuck at a stubborn 4.62%. I mean, these two numbers are telling completely different stories about the same economy. So what gives? Why was that underlying trend so sticky when everything else seemed to be cooling down? Well, the answer was kind of hiding in plain sight, and trust me, it is not what you would expect. The culprit wasn't some hidden, widespread inflation bubbling up everywhere. It was gold and silver. So let's look at that official core inflation number again, 4.62%. On paper, that looks pretty high, right? Stubborn. But the absolute key, the thing you have to remember, is that the soaring prices of gold and silver are baked into that number. And now for the big reveal. When you take that same core inflation number, but you just pull out gold and silver, look what happens. The number gets chopped in half. It drops all the way down to 2.27%. So that sticky core inflation, it was basically a statistical illusion created by a global surge in precious metal prices. The real underlying economy was actually cooling down right along with everything else. Mystery solved. Okay, so the puzzle is solved. India's inflation story is even better than it looks on the surface. But what's next? Let's take a look at the road to 2027. All right, looking ahead, both the Reserve Bank of India and the IMF are pretty much on the same page. They see inflation ticking back up, probably settling somewhere around the 4% mark. Now, that's higher than it has been for sure, but it's still right in the sweet spot of the central bank's target. So the thinking is it's under control. But of course, it's never that simple. There are always risks lurking out there. You've got geopolitical instability that could mess with supply chains at any moment. And prices for other metals, industrial ones like copper, they're already on the rise. And hey, remember our culprit, gold and silver? If global demand for them stays high, it could keep making that core inflation number look a little wacky. It's definitely something to watch.
So when you put it all together, the takeaway is pretty clear. Through a mix of smart policy, a bit of good fortune with food prices, and a fascinating statistical quirk, India pulled off something amazing. That perfect balance of high growth and low inflation. But the real test, in a world that is anything but predictable, is whether this calm can actually last. And that is a question we'll all be watching very, very closely.